Right. So, hi, I'm Dr. Marianne Trent and I'm a clinical psychologist. I've got a keen interest in research, and I spotted some really interesting research just yesterday, actually, and it got me very excited. And so I reached out to the person that's written the research, and he's here with me today. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Hari Parekh. I wrote the research study on Apostates as a hidden population of abuse victims, which was published in January of this year. I've got around 4 years experience working in psychology. So yeah, I've got my stripes.
Okay. Oh, honestly, I'm so excited to speak to you. I predominantly worked in adult mental health, but also children and families. So I was surprised to learn of a really big, interesting word that I had no idea what it is. Even to look at it on paper, I was like, I don't even know how to say that. Can you take us through what
Yeah.
it is?
So apostate is a big word, and it's the way that the religious kind of describe. It's a term used by the religious to describe people raised within religious families who once identified as religious, but have now ceased to believe in the existence of a god, gods, or follow that religious belief. So, and then they now identify as non-religious. So it's the people that have gone from being religious to non-religious.
Okay. So there's not like a tick box option on forms that we see as yet saying apostate,
No.
but it's you'd sort of either you'd go for like no religion or
Yeah, you go for no religion, or
religion.
you go for atheist, or you go for other. I think it's one of those terms which isn't really widely used or really widely recognised. It's kind of used as a kind of label used by the religious to negatively sometimes associate somebody with that word. But the people that have gone through that process seem to have taken it on themselves and kind of owned the word.
Okay, so they're owning it, they're doing it, but it's
Yeah.
actually originally was a derogatory term. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. Perhaps we need to think about rebranding it. But I guess whatever it is for now, it's just important that we talk about it. And, for me, who's a qualified clinical psychologist who have never heard of this term, it was, I'm also excited to learn new terms and new things, but it feels like something I should have known about.
See, I don't think you should have done, and I think that's the beauty of it. In that, this is the problem with hidden populations. In that nobody would know that this exists within normal kind of consensus and normal kind of conversations. In the same way that all those years ago, nobody knew that domestic violence was a thing. Nobody knew that sexual violence was a thing, or honor-based violence was a thing. And it's the same rhetoric in going. It's not a hindrance on any professional to not know what it is. When, for example, this is the first time the academic sphere can actually point themselves to an academic piece to say this exists. So I would never say that a professional should have known it. If anything, what it does is it adds to the professional repertoire of any professional working in the field to go, oh, hang on a minute, are we missing something out? And that's the conversation which I'm sure you're interested in. So yeah, no worries about not knowing it, but the beauty of being a professional is that once you do know it, you're like, oh.
I love that I know it. So thank you for introducing that to my consciousness, but also it will be something that I honestly, sincerely will take with me to think about with clients, regardless of their faith or current faith. I guess having read your research, everybody should, very interesting. It was really, for me, it's so important to think about family systems, but also family background. So, you said that actually people who classed themselves in apostates and took part in your research had experienced violence from family members because of that.
Precisely. And it's the same issues that you have with intrafamilial kind of family violence. It's that kind of area where these victims are being, as the kind of terms go, they're being assaulted, they're being seriously assaulted, and they're being psychologically abused. The difference between the assault and the serious assault is the difference between pushed and shoved to being threatened to be killed or being threatened to be harmed with like a knife or a gun or something more serious than that. and psychological abuse contains a plethora of things like coercive control, stress, depression, isolation, neglect, all of those kind of terms as well, which we see within the kind of clinical framework. When we work, I've got experience working with people that have been through domestic violence, and it's very similar kind of notions of the things that they've gone through. So yeah, it's bringing on a seriousness in the fact that leaving a religious faith or making that decision that this perspective might not be for you has consequences that are very extreme, and we need to be very aware of, actually, within certain frameworks, how is this working? When they're going to the GP, when families are going to the GP with their child, when they're going to hospital, when they're seeing a nurse and they're seeing a midwife, in all these kind of different areas, or when they're going to school, we only have to look at the cases, the case studies of things like Victoria Climbié, Baby P, Daniel Pelker in Coventry, Sabji and Suji Atwell, or Shafir Ahmed, and look at the honor-based violence within that, all the different cultural and traditional issues, and go, people in positions of power struggle to question that. Why did they struggle with that? And actually what's related to that? We've only just got to the point now where we've got systems in place for professionals to do that. And I'm basically saying, hi, you need to add another one into that remit. And here's something sadly for professionals, here's another angle that we need to be aware of, because
another thing for us to think about on our training, but really important to think about.
Because you could imagine them going to the GP with their parent or with their carer, and having gone through all of this stuff and not being able to voice it. It's the same way as women aren't able to voice about rape, or not able to voice about sexual violence or domestic violence. And how do we allow that to happen? Again, training.
One of my clinical specialties has become working with people who have been traumatized, either through sort of type 1 trauma, so like something extreme like a explosion or something like that, but also type 2 traumas, which would be kind of stuff that adds up, that is smaller stuff all joined up, or developmental trauma, so stuff from their childhood, first 18 years of life. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's a scale that is widely used in trauma populations called the ACE, so the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. And when I was reading your research, I guess I was wondering whether the people who were in your survey, whether if they'd been ACEd before, it's possibly an area of future research, whether they all were, how high their ACE score would have been anyway. So whether they're more likely to become an apostate, to turn away from a family that's always been quite scary and quite controlling, or whether actually maybe their ACE score, so the first 18 years of life, maybe their ACE score was 0. But then the reaction to leaving the faith has evoked this violence. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think the complication of this with an ACE would be that it's not necessarily that it will always be through adverse childhood experiences that somebody would therefore leave. For example, you could you could go through childhood completely, you could go through childhood completely fine, and maybe then decide that actually this perspective isn't for me, but the childhood was completely fair and there were no complications there, and you could be an 18-year-old going, this isn't for me. We also know of people within like Jehovah's Witness communities who, there was an 80-year-old lady that left at 80.
Wow.
And she's like, I'm finally able to leave, for example. So the ACE would perhaps not kind of figure out the intricacies of what constitutes somebody leaving, because the plethora is massive.
I wonder whether it might have some predictive power for thinking about what the familial reaction would be, though. So it might not necessarily be a contributor to them wanting to become an apostate, but whether or not it might be predictive for the violence or the hostility.
True. I think that what we found and what we find is that it's whether somebody makes the public announcement that they've left, whichever religious denomination, if they leave, it's primarily focused on what's going to be the reaction of the family when I do it. So some people care about the reaction quite a lot, whereas some people go, you know what, I need to make the call and I'm done. for the people that take a lot more thought into the reaction of other people, there's a concern as to going, you're making a decision based on you, but you're adding all these factors involved to make sure that, is the decision I'm making legitimate. They weigh in, and that ace would then have a bit of power to it then, or a bit of strength to it, to go, well, actually, if the household, or if the factors within it are kind of threatening towards somebody leaving in that way, then maybe there's something in that where they would suggest that they would remain within such practices, or they wouldn't challenge it, or they'd find that they couldn't, which would be really useful information. Again, future research, isn't it? That's the joy of future research.
I'd seen that in your paper you'd referenced it to sort of almost being like coming out, if somebody's coming out to their family about their sexuality, and sort of likened that disclosure as becoming an apostate.
Yeah, there's because interestingly, the notions of gender and sexuality, and the way that is concentrated upon within kind of religious households or religious communities, and the way that that's perceived, especially if you're if you identify as part of the LGBTQ plus range, that there's a complication there of how people might react to that. Now, the severity that could bring is very similar to an apostate coming out, because the sad thing is that scriptures don't provide any leniency, and neither do community structures, and neither do family structures either. So the severity.
I was surprised to see your appendices at the end of the research with the bits of scripture from different faiths, literally saying what should happen to people who look elsewhere for religion.
And that's only a snapshot, and that was only, I had like 2 or 3 pages before I brought it to Vince, who's the second author, who's my supervisor, and he was just like, you need to cut that down, you just pick a few.
There's always more to say, isn't there? But the word count doesn't allow it.
Precisely. And I think that, we can't get away from the fact that it's written in a way where leniency is not there for making such a decision. And we have to be aware of that. But to be fair, just because it's written doesn't mean we have to do. So again, it's looking at human reaction, and it's looking at, it's with the CFT model, for example, you're looking at the threat systems of people that you're then approaching. You're looking at the way that people react to news that they weren't expecting. And factoring that is probably the biggest part of this.
Yeah. So if we could have mental health professions know and do one thing other than be accepting and open without judgment, is there anything you think would be useful for us to be doing or to know?
I mean, it's this thing of, for example, the concern when we started this was, how will the psychological kind of professional population view this? And
this one loves it. This one thinks it's really useful.
Yay! And that's the point, in that actually what we're trying to say is that up until now, perhaps, the way that the structures of religion and the way that communities and families kind of assert themselves around a religious faith and belief and traditions and cultures and values, psychologically speaking, is gold dust, because a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years don't have half of that. And you think, you know what, having that level of stability, if we use CFT terms, using compassion focused therapy terms, if they have that kind of sense of stability and support, then actually that would provide them with at least a little bit more of an opportunity going forwards, which is what a lot of the research would say. We're kind of turning that on its head a little bit here, where we're saying, hang on a minute, guys. I know that all of you guys are saying that this is all fabulous stuff. What happens when it doesn't work? And I think that it's that perspective that the academic sphere, even in psychology, hasn't seen before. There are plenty of activists that have spoken about it, but this is the first time academically we can say, hang on a minute, let's question and critique this beautiful thing that we think is a really good thing. So it's about our ability to reflect and go, just because they've got family structures, community structures, religious ties, and doesn't mean that means that that's positively enabled going forwards. Actually, do we need to question that, or do we need to look at that a little bit more in depth, and how was that operated for them If anything, within intervention, I think you could probably appreciate it gives you this extra level of going, well, let's just tap into that a little bit and let's see where that's at. And that's an angle that perhaps clinicians haven't had before.
Gives us a bit of added value and a bit of confidence to think about it.
Yeah, and the notion of you can think about it in those ways. Like we can question, the ident. When you're working with a patient, for example, for a number of years, you learn to, you formulate that patient, you understand the kind of how they are, why they are, where they are, what's caused it, etc. If anything, this gives you an extra angle within that to go, hang on a minute, let's just. This means so much to you. In what way? How? Where does that come from? And actually, I remember working with a patient previously, and her religious identity was part of the domestic violence that she'd been through. So technically, having to talk about the religious faith at the same time of talking about her trauma and domestic violence history, you can't not separate. You can't keep them both separate.
Yeah.
You've got to bridge the gap and go, well, actually, your thoughts on this side and your thoughts on this side kind of match up here. Whereas that's concerning. We need to have that ability as professionals to have the confidence to say, you know what, I can question that religious part, or I can question that cultural part, and I can question that traditional part.
If you do it from a position of respect, I think that's okay. And inquiry and thinking about whether it's keeping some of the problems stuck.
I think so.
Yeah. I was really interested to know that there's an organisation as well that supports people. So I'd never heard of Faith to Faithless, but that's something you mention in your research as well.
Yeah. So they work as the Apostate service for the non-religious charity Humanist UK. I currently work as their volunteers manager. So what we do is we support and work. I know, right? There's always we work to support non-religious and apostates who have gone through these experiences. I think we also provide things like safeguarding training for professionals. We provide, we go to universities to deliver talks, and all those kind of things. So we're trying, and hopefully the aim is
such a varied experience. It's amazing.
Thank you. I mean, this is a point in that I was very lucky in that, I was originally Hindu and I became an apostate at university. Okay. But I went through none of the adverse issues that are raised in the paper. Working with, when I used to run the student sector of Humanist UK, I met the co-founders of Faithless, who were Imtiaz Shams and Alia Salim. And that was when they were a standalone organisation. And I realised that actually people are being abused as a result of leaving their religious faith. Well, this is the truth. At the same time, I was doing my master's in forensic and criminological psychology, and they were like, pick a dissertation topic. Come on, find something.
Do you ever sleep?
No. And, they were basically, I was failing at finding a dissertation topic. And then Vincent was just like,
do what you know, do what you enjoy.
What are you interested in? And I was like, well, Vince, here's an area that hasn't been looked at before. And I mean, he knows his stuff. And he was like, well, that's piqued my interest.
Okay. It's piqued mine too. That decision all those years ago has led us together today.
Well, we're looking at 2015, 2016 when this was a master's thesis on its own. Right. So it's taken a good 4 or 5 years for it to get to the point of publication.
Yeah, well, it brought us together, Hari.
Definitely.
Oh, it's been so nice to talk to you. And honestly, you've given me such food for thought. So thank you for doing the research, but also then thanks for following it through and actually writing it up and get it to publication, because so many of us, myself included with my my doctoral thesis, just never got to publication. And well done to you, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of commitment.
Thank you. It was, I think the argument from my point was that if we had, we were really lucky to kind of meet the hypotheses that, there are people being abused for this. We were lucky that we met the hypothesis for that. So I think that it would have been...
Those people might have said they're unlucky, but yeah, in terms of research goal.
Yeah, basically true. But I think the fact that we were able to, because we not only did we work with Faithless, we worked with Humanist UK.
You've got a good sample as well. It's a nice size sample you had.
Yeah, we worked with the Peter Tatchell Foundation, and we got a worldwide sample as well. So this isn't just going one nation is at risk. This is, you know, throughout the entirety.
Yeah.
And I think that it would have been a disservice to the victims that put their name forward to have not have pushed it forward for publication. And the fact that it's the first one is just the icing on the cake, really, because we can basically shout about it.
I love that it is the first one, because actually it makes everybody feel less alone. I'm sure all of the research participants, you know, have access to copy and feel really validated and heard because of that. But then, you know, for clinicians like me, I can evidence it. You know, Parekh 2020. You know, have you read that paper? That's amazing. You know, that's a really, you know, it's really nice to be part of that. But it's gonna speak, and it's gonna keep on speaking. To support clinicians, but also help clients feel heard, understood, and less isolated and alone. So it's really,
I'm really glad that you've had that response to it, because I think that's what is. I think the next steps for this piece is that's where it's headed in relation to getting more and more professionals becoming more and more aware of this exists. Here's an area we didn't know. Okay, what do we do about it? And I think that having professionals like yourself go, that's really interesting, I'm glad it piqued my attention, means that it will gain more than what it would have done, and hopefully the attention it can then gain will then work towards, you know, things like policy and procedure and kind of influencing governments and legislation and things like that as well. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah, well, me too. Well done, good job, Hari. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today and to kind of get this story out there a bit more with mental health focus as well. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.